For more than half a century, one cigarette butt sat inside a police evidence room. It had been discovered near the body of a 24-year-old woman named Rita Curran. Rita did not smoke that brand. Investigators believed the cigarette might have belonged to the man who entered her bedroom, attacked her, and strangled her. But this was July 1971. DNA profiling did not exist. Genetic genealogy did not exist. There were no searchable national databases capable of identifying a stranger from saliva left on a cigarette. So the evidence remained silent. Years became decades. Rita's parents died without knowing who had taken their daughter's life. Detectives retired. Suspects came and went. At one point, some people even wondered whether one of America's most notorious serial killers had been responsible. But the truth was much closer than anyone imagined. According to investigators, Rita's killer was not a mysterious traveler passing through town. He lived in the same apartment building. He had been questioned shortly after the murder, and his wife had given police an alibi that would protect him for more than 50 years. Then science exposed the lie. This is the story of Rita Curran, the neighbor upstairs, and the cigarette that waited 52 years to reveal a killer. Rita Curran was 24 years old in the summer of 1971. She came from Milton, Vermont, and was the oldest of 3 children. Her family remembered her as responsible, religious, hardworking, and deeply connected to those closest to her. Rita had attended Trinity College in Burlington and became a teacher. She had already completed 2 years of teaching and had worked with young children at Milton Elementary School. During the summer months, when school was closed, she worked as a chambermaid at the Colonial Motor Inn in Burlington. She was also taking graduate classes and building a future for herself. That summer represented an important step in Rita's independence. For the first time, she had moved away from her parents' home. She rented a room in an apartment on Brooks Avenue in Burlington, sharing the home with several roommates she did not know particularly well. The arrangement was temporary. Rita reportedly spent considerable time with her family and had already expressed discomfort with parts of the living situation. Still, nothing suggested she was in immediate danger. She had a job, she had plans, she had people who loved her. And on Monday, July 19, 1971, she followed what appeared to be an ordinary routine. Rita worked during the day. That evening, she attended a singing rehearsal with a local women's group. At approximately 10 p.m., she returned to the Brooks Avenue apartment. One of her roommates was home. Rita said that she was tired and intended to go to bed. It was one of the last known conversations she ever had. At some point later that night, Rita was alone inside the apartment. Her roommates had gone out. Investigators would eventually determine that the killer had only a narrow opportunity in which to act, approximately 70 minutes. Within that window, someone entered the apartment and reached Rita's bedroom. There was no established evidence of a forced entry. That raised several troubling possibilities. Perhaps Rita had known the person. Perhaps the door had been left unlocked. Perhaps the door had been left unlocked. Or perhaps the killer lived close enough to understand the movements of the people inside. Rita appears to have been resting or preparing to sleep when she was confronted. The attack was sudden and violent. Police later said she fought fiercely against her assailant. The bedroom showed signs of a terrible struggle. Rita was beaten, sexually assaulted, and strangled. Her clothing was damaged. Evidence from the attack was left on her housecoat. And somewhere during the violence, a cigarette was discarded near her body. When the attacker left, the apartment became silent again. From outside, the building may have looked completely normal. People living nearby may have gone to sleep without realizing that a young woman had just been murdered only a few steps away. In the early morning hours of July 20th, one of Rita's roommates returned home. Inside the shared bedroom, she discovered Rita's body. Police were called to the apartment. The scene immediately revealed that Rita had not died naturally. She had suffered a violent assault. Her body and bedroom showed that she had resisted the attacker. Investigators began collecting evidence. In 1971, crime scene work was far less technologically advanced than it is today. But the officers did something that would ultimately become essential. They carefully preserved what they found. Among the items collected was a cigarette butt lying close to Rita's body. It was reportedly a Lark cigarette. The cigarette appeared important because Rita did not smoke that brand. If the cigarette had been left by the attacker, the person had unknowingly deposited saliva on it. At that time, saliva on a cigarette was not viewed as a source of genetic identification. DNA profiling would not become an investigative tool for many years. Still, someone made the decision to package and preserve it. That decision would eventually solve the case. Investigators also collected evidence from Rita's damaged clothing and examined the bedroom for fingerprints, fibers, and other physical traces. They interviewed neighbors, friends, co-workers, and roommates. Hundreds of tips were reportedly investigated. One of the officials who visited the scene was Patrick Leahy, then the state's attorney for Chittenden County, and later a United States Senator. Decades later, Leahy said that despite the many disturbing crimes he had encountered, Rita's murder remained in his memory. The brutality of the crime shook Burlington, but the identity of the attacker remained unknown. Among the residents questioned after the murder were William and Michelle DeRoos. They lived upstairs in the same Brooks Avenue building. William DeRoos was 31 years old. He and Michelle had reportedly been married for only about 2 weeks. When police asked about the night Rita was killed, the couple said they had been inside their apartment together. They claimed they had not seen or heard anything suspicious. Michelle supported her husband's account. That statement gave William an alibi. There appeared to be no physical evidence investigators could use at the time to challenge it. The cigarette had not been connected to him. There was no DNA technology capable of identifying its smoker, and no witness reported seeing William inside Rita's apartment. The DeRooses soon left Vermont. Their marriage later ended. William traveled to Thailand, where he reportedly became a Buddhist monk, before eventually returning to the United States. The young couple, questioned shortly after Rita's death, gradually disappeared from the center of the investigation. Police pursued other possibilities, but the case produced no arrest. As the years passed, another name became associated with Rita's case: Ted Bundy. Bundy became one of the most notorious serial killers in American history. He targeted young women, often attacking them in or near their homes. There were details in Rita's murder that appeared similar to crimes later connected to Bundy. He also had a connection to Burlington because he had been born there. These similarities led some investigators and observers to question whether Bundy could have killed Rita. Rita's family wanted answers badly enough that her sister reportedly wrote to Bundy while he was awaiting execution. Bundy never gave the family a clear confession. Investigators were unable to place him conclusively at the Brooks Avenue apartment on the night Rita died. Before his execution, Bundy reportedly denied responsibility for her murder. For years, however, the possibility added another layer of mystery. Had one of America's most infamous killers committed an early, previously unknown murder in Vermont? Or was the speculation distracting attention from someone much closer? Eventually, DNA would provide the answer. The cigarette beside Rita's body did not belong to Ted Bundy. It pointed to the neighbor upstairs. Cold cases create a particular kind of pain. A family is not only grieving the person who died, they are also living with questions that never stop. Who did it? Why Rita? Was the killer someone she knew? Was he still alive? Could he attack someone else? Rita's parents spent the rest of their lives without learning the truth. Her siblings grew older while their sister remained forever 24. Birthdays passed. Anniversaries passed. The Brooks Avenue apartment changed occupants. The detectives originally assigned to the investigation moved on or retired. William DeRoos lived for another 15 years after Rita's murder. He died from a drug overdose in a San Francisco hotel in 1986. He was never arrested for Rita's murder. He was never placed on trial. And because he had died before the evidence could identify him, he would never answer questions about what happened inside Rita's bedroom. For the investigation, however, death did not erase the physical evidence. The cigarette remained preserved. In 2014, investigators sent the cigarette butt and other preserved evidence for modern DNA testing. A male DNA profile was successfully developed from the cigarette. This was a major breakthrough. For the first time, police possessed a biological profile believed to belong to the person who had smoked near Rita's body. The profile was compared against law enforcement DNA databases. There was no match. That result did not mean the evidence was useless. It simply meant the man's DNA was not stored in the databases being searched. Perhaps he had never committed an offense that required a DNA sample. Perhaps he had died before modern DNA collection became common. The identity remained hidden, but investigators had moved closer. The cigarette was no longer just an old piece of evidence. It contained the genetic signature of a real person. Police only needed a new way to find him. In 2019, Burlington detectives reopened the investigation with a different approach. Rather than assigning one detective to review the old files alone, the department assembled a team. They decided to treat Rita's murder as though it had just happened. They re-examined the timeline. They reviewed old interviews. They looked at the people living in the apartment building. They reconsidered the narrow window in which Rita had been killed. Most importantly, they turned to investigative genetic genealogy. Genetic genealogy differs from a standard criminal DNA database search. A traditional database looks for a direct match between crime scene DNA and a stored offender profile. Genetic genealogy searches for people who share portions of DNA with the unknown person. Those partial matches may belong to distant cousins or other relatives who have submitted their genetic information to genealogy services. Researchers then build family trees. They examine marriages, births, deaths, ages, and locations. Gradually, they work backwards from distant relatives toward a possible suspect. The technique does not establish guilt by itself. It produces investigative leads that must be confirmed through additional evidence. In Rita's case, genealogists traced the cigarette DNA through relatives on both the paternal and maternal sides of one family. The family tree pointed toward William DeRoos, the same man who had lived upstairs, the same man who had been questioned after Rita's murder, and the same man whose wife had told police he was home all night. Investigators could not close a 52-year-old murder solely because a family tree suggested DeRoos. They needed confirmation. They located one of his living half-brothers. The relative voluntarily provided a DNA sample. Testing strengthened the conclusion that the DNA from the cigarette belonged to William DeRoos. Investigators then compared the cigarette DNA with biological material recovered from Rita's torn housecoat. It matched. This was critical. The cigarette might theoretically have been left during an innocent visit, but the same male genetic profile appeared on clothing damaged during Rita's attack. That connected the smoker directly to the crime. The DNA evidence did not point toward Ted Bundy. It did not point toward one of the previously discussed strangers. It pointed toward the neighbor who had lived upstairs. But detectives still needed to understand his opportunity. For that, they returned to the woman who had protected him in 1971. More than 50 years after the murder, detectives re-interviewed William DeRoos's former wife. She was no longer the newly married young woman who had spoken to police in 1971. This time, her account changed. She admitted that William had not remained home with her throughout the night. The couple had argued. William became upset and left the apartment to take what was described as a walk to cool down. His absence occurred during the narrow period when Rita was alone. After returning, William reportedly instructed his wife to tell police that he had never left. He had a criminal history, and claimed officers might treat him unfairly if they knew he had been outside. His wife agreed to support the false story. Detectives said they did not believe she knew William had murdered Rita. They believed she was young, newly married, and trying to protect the man she loved. Nevertheless, the false alibi had serious consequences. For more than 5 decades, it concealed a crucial opportunity. William had been absent during the murder window. He lived only a short distance from Rita's bedroom. His DNA was on the cigarette beside her body, and the same DNA was found on clothing involved in her assault. The alibi that had once protected him had finally disappeared. Investigators also contacted another woman who later married William DeRoos. Her account revealed troubling information about his behavior. She described him as someone capable of sudden and unpredictable violence. According to the investigation, she recalled an incident in which William produced a knife and stabbed a female acquaintance in the abdomen without a clear reason. The injured woman reportedly did not pursue charges. His later wife also described an occasion when William suddenly began strangling her during a meal. She survived and eventually left him. These later allegations could not prove that he killed Rita. They occurred after 1971 and were not tested in a murder trial. However, investigators considered them consistent with the violent attack Rita suffered. Rita had also been strangled. The accounts suggested that beneath the spiritual identity William later adopted was a man capable of abrupt and serious violence against women. Police began assembling the entire picture. The DNA, the false alibi, the timing, the location, the matching evidence on Rita's clothing, the later reports of violence. Each piece pointed toward the same person. Each piece pointed toward the same person. On February 21, 2023, Burlington police publicly announced that they had solved Rita Curran's murder. Nearly 52 years had passed since her body was found. Police identified William DeRoos as the person responsible. Detective Lieutenant James Trebe said the investigative team was confident that DeRoos had killed Rita, but there would be no arrest, no courtroom, no cross-examination, no sentencing. William had been dead since 1986. Legally, he had never been convicted of Rita's murder. The conclusion was based on the police investigation and forensic evidence. That distinction matters. The case was closed through identification, not through a criminal verdict. Rita's surviving brother and sister attended the police announcement. Their parents had not lived long enough to hear the killer's name. For Rita's siblings, the moment brought both answers and renewed grief. They finally knew who police believed had killed their sister, but they could not confront him. They could not ask why. They could not watch a judge impose punishment. The man responsible had escaped legal accountability through death. Still, his secret had not survived. The case against DeRoos rested on several connected pieces of evidence. First, DNA from the cigarette butt near Rita's body was genetically linked to DeRoos's family. Second, a sample from his living half-brother supported the identification. Third, the DNA on the cigarette matched male DNA recovered from Rita's damaged housecoat. Fourth, DeRoos lived upstairs in the same apartment building. Fifth, his wife admitted he had left their home during the estimated 70-minute murder window. Sixth, he instructed her to lie to investigators and claimed that he had been home all night. Finally, a later partner described sudden violent behavior, including strangulation. No single fact should be viewed in isolation. A neighbor might innocently leave a cigarette in someone's apartment. A husband might take a walk after an argument. A frightened wife might lie because of her husband's criminal record. But when the cigarette DNA also appeared on clothing involved in a violent assault, The innocent explanations became far less plausible. Investigators concluded that William left his upstairs apartment after arguing with his wife. During that short absence, he entered Rita's apartment and attacked her. He then returned home and persuaded his wife to protect him with a false alibi. According to police, that lie helped him avoid identification for the remainder of his life. In 2019, Burlington detectives reopened the investigation with a different approach. Rather than assigning one detective to review the old files alone, the department assembled a team. They decided to treat Rita's murder as though it had just happened. They re-examined the timeline. They reviewed old interviews. They looked at the people living in the apartment building. They reconsidered the narrow window in which Rita had been killed. Most importantly, they turned to investigative genetic genealogy. Genetic genealogy differs from a standard criminal DNA database search. A traditional database looks for a direct match between crime scene DNA and a stored offender profile. Genetic genealogy searches for people who share portions of DNA with the unknown person. Those partial matches may belong to distant cousins or other relatives who have submitted their genetic information to genealogy services. Researchers then build family trees. They examine marriages, births, deaths, ages, and locations. Gradually, they work backwards from distant relatives toward a possible suspect. The technique does not establish guilt by itself. It produces investigative leads that must be confirmed through additional evidence. In Rita's case, genealogists traced the cigarette DNA through relatives on both the paternal and maternal sides of one family. The family tree pointed toward William DeRoos, the same man who had lived upstairs, the same man who had been questioned after Rita's murder, and the same man whose wife had told police he was home all night. True crime stories can sometimes allow the killer to overshadow the victim. William DeRoos became important because investigators identified him, but Rita Curran is the reason the story matters. She was not merely a body found in an apartment. She was a daughter, a sister, a teacher, a singer, a young woman beginning an independent life. Her students would have expected to see her return to the classroom. Her parents expected to watch her grow older. Her siblings expected to share decades of family memories with her. All of that disappeared during a 70-minute period in July 1971. Her killer then continued living. He traveled. He remarried. He went abroad. He adopted new identities and new roles. Rita received none of those additional years. That is why identifying the person responsible mattered even after his death. The announcement could not restore Rita's life. It could not erase her family's pain. But it corrected the public record. Rita was no longer connected only to rumors about Ted Bundy or an unknown intruder. The evidence gave her case a name. William DeRoos may have believed the secret was safe. His wife had supported his alibi. No witness had seen him attack Rita. The cigarette appeared to be nothing more than rubbish on the floor. He left Vermont. He moved across the world. He died before investigators could question him again. For decades, there seemed to be no path back to him. But inside that cigarette was a map. Not a map of streets or buildings. A genetic map leading through parents, cousins, siblings, and generations. A map that eventually returned detectives to the apartment upstairs. The killer had lived only steps away. He had been interviewed. He had been protected by a lie. And he had left part of himself beside Rita's body. The evidence waited 52 years. Rita's parents never heard the answer. Her siblings finally did. On February 21st, 2023, police closed Burlington's oldest unsolved murder and named William DeRoos as Rita Curran's killer. He was beyond the reach of a courtroom, but he was not beyond the reach of the truth. Because time can weaken memories. Witnesses can disappear. Suspects can die. But properly preserved evidence can continue speaking long after everyone else has gone silent. And sometimes, the smallest object at a crime scene, a cigarette butt lying unnoticed beside a young woman's body, can carry the truth for more than half a century.